Everyone, we'll start now with our closing session. And as chair of the conference and of the session, pleasure to be here again. This is our fifth conference. The first one had roughly 150 people. This one has over 500 people from over 60 countries. You see the growth rate that we're experiencing, and it really is pronounced. I think we learn an awful lot. There's ever more people coming here from different backgrounds. We're sharing our knowledge, our experience, our frustrations, and we're making progress. I think we lose sight of that sometimes when we look at the barriers we have. But when we look at some of the breakthroughs we've had on products and countries and regulation, over these last few years, it's dramatic. And it's a matter of how do we accelerate that. So great to be here again. And what we're going to be doing for the closing is I'm going to be passing it along down the line here. Harry and David are our rapporteurs, followed by Aaron, who's going to be giving out the Film Fest Awards. And then we're going to have some reflections on the conference from Alex, Andy, and Cynthia. So I will now be quiet and pass it down along the line, see how it goes.
Thank you, David. Just as a kind of bit of promo to start with, some of you may have noticed this video that's been running outside, and GSTHR stands for the Global State of Tobacco Harm Reduction. It's a report that I'm writing and editing with the support of a very large number of people, and it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's a forward-facing report which will be formally launched in the first week of October at Geneva, and I think there's some other conference of the parties or something like that going on at the same time. Completely coincidental, of course, and we'll be hoping to attract some kind of media attention away from the shenanigans. Well, actually, when the journalists get kicked out of the COP meeting, we hope that we'll be able to attract them to our little event. So there'll be an interactive website. We'll be translating the executive summary in a number of languages. And hopefully after Geneva, we'll be kind of taking the whole thing on the road. And hopefully this is a forward-facing public document. So hopefully all of the community, whether you're consumers, clinicians, policymakers, wherever you're coming from, you'll be able to make use of a report like this, maybe to give it to the legislators and regulators who get invited to this conference but don't come, probably waving Article 5.3 in the face at the same time. But maybe you can convince them with something that is entirely evidence-based, that they really need to start rethinking their attitudes. So the last panel session that we had here was very disappointing for me because I was hoping it was going to be really boring so that I wouldn't have to integrate any of the comments that came out of it into a rapporteur report that was being given like 10 minutes after the end of the session. Sadly for me, though, it actually was extremely good, and so I am going to try and include some of what was said in that session. There are some various takeaways, various themes that various people touched upon. The first one was communication. If you were here for ICENTEC, you heard Chris Proctor talking about how we must be very cautious about saying things like, e-cigs are 95% safer than cigarettes and all the rest of it. But there's an element of risk communication here that we have to take on board. And the Michael Russell ovation given by Joe Kosterick said it all. He said, keep it simple, stupid, basically. Journalists need to understand the simple messages. And if you say something's 95% safer than something else, hopefully they get that. The other important thing he said, which flowed through the conference, I think, was run your own race. That was his last slide. And, I heard from Cecilia Kinstrad Isaksson from Swedish Match. I paraphrase what she said, but basically she said the devil has all the best tunes. And we need to get a more coordinated approach and kind of break out of the bubble that I think we all live in. And Colin Mendelsohn from Australia is doing just that with the Australian Tobacco Harm Reduction Association, which is making inroads outside the bubble and trying to engage with with the people, particularly in Australia, who need to be engaged with to change the rules. Jeannie Cameron talked about basically don't wait for the politicians to act. And Konstantinos was basically saying, don't come to this conference, go somewhere else. Basically, go into the lion's den and try and make them listen to the truth, if I can put it like that. Okay, so the other takeaway strand that ran through this for me was get on with it. I've heard David say that, you know, if Steve Jobs had got up on the stage and waved a mobile phone in front of his shareholders and said, hey guys, in 25 years we're going to absolutely nail this one, they would have laughed him straight out of the boardroom, and quite rightly too. There are various indications in the room that we were getting on with it. I was quite impressed with Vape Trotter, who managed to go from a sort of standing start towards the back end of last year to produce a really excellent website of vaping shops and legal and regulatory information from around the world. And they just really went from a standing start to nothing. By complete contrast, there was the presentation from Jim Figler from Kentucky Biopharmaceuticals, who managed to bring a product to market to fight Ebola in about 3 years, which for a pharmaceutical product is incredibly swift. And then today, Martin Jarvis was talking about more fleet-footed research that we need of the sort that Michael Russell was engaged in. And finally, in terms of being quick off the mark, I am grateful to my friend here, Mr. David MacKintosh, for reminding me that the political cycle is not measured in decades. It's measured in years, months, or even weeks. And we heard from this afternoon that there may be an FDA moment where, you know, people can begin to signal a kind of softening approach when it comes to alternative product regulation in, at least in the USA. We heard an awful lot about the consumer voice, and quite rightly so. Media love human interest stories. I think the vaping advocacy groups around the world, including INCO, really need to be tooled up to kind of speak to a wider audience. And to make use of, I mean, I fortunately didn't get to see any of the films in this year, but if you can imagine the sort of human interest stories that must have been embedded in all those films, these are the sorts of things that can really move people and may move people, hopefully, in the right direction. And we also heard some powerful stuff about the voices of the neglected, and I think they need to be included in this dialogue as well. Which leads me swiftly to the notion of bringing together tobacco harm reduction and drug harm reduction, because Helen Redmond made a very, very powerful point about the fact that people with serious drug problems quite often manage to, you know, they try really hard to kind of conquer the crack and the crystal meth and the heroin, whatever it is, and they're still left battling with cigarettes. Later on, I think it was this afternoon, somebody was talking about, you know, how do you begin to start engage with WHO and some of these other organisations? Well, WHO initially very resistant to the idea of drug harm reduction, fairly swiftly came on board with needle exchange and all the rest of it. And if we want to talk about gateway effect, then it's quite possible. It's possible, I don't know, but that drug harm reduction could be a gateway for bringing tobacco harm reduction closer into the kind of interventional kind of mainstream, and that may be a route that some people might want to investigate. And I think finally, I started off talking about the global state of tobacco harm reduction, and Rajesh from India and Hosi from South Africa made some extremely good point that it's not just about new technology, it's not just about new devices and newfangled gadgets. You've got huge populations who for centuries are culturally linked to smokeless tobacco. And I think it's coming from most of the countries that we come through, it's easy to forget that side of the equation. And hopefully, if we can take the global report out on the road, we can maybe touch into some of those areas and begin to get more of a cultural appreciation of the global state of tobacco harm reduction. Thank you very much.
I do hope everyone understood Harry. If people have trouble with my accent, I'm very fortunate that Martin Corley's at the back and will be able to offer translations into English. Quick thing, sort of thought about this event. 3 days, 24 sessions, 55 presenters. It's really not a trivial event, and the fact that so many of you are here, I think, says a lot about what you've got out of it, even if you aren't aware that they're giving Ben & Jerry's ice cream away over at the park, but don't go out to get it yet. But that is true. My local intelligence sources are superb. The first session I went to was really good in that it really did get the mind working, and it was looking at harm reduction in Africa, but also other lower middle income countries. And just to get out of the sort of comfort zone of the bit you think you know about, very, very useful. And the affordability thing, there was it was a small group, there was someone from the industry there, and they were asked the question, how much is your sort of starter setup? And they were quite proud and said, $10, which UK perspective sounds incredibly good. But as one of the other members in the group said, that's 15 days subsistence budget for someone. So it makes you think when you're trying to reach huge populations. And the cost, and there was also a very good discussion around the environmental impacts, and I think that links into some of the stuff we've heard. Harm reduction is not just electronic, it's not just vaping. But the real thing that I took away from that was the scale of the potential gain, the size of the populations, and I think that should be something that should, that's stuff that we should be engaging with perhaps on the global stage. Joe Gittrell's presentation about the route of administration, I guess, brought home to me a bit about the issues around addiction, dependence use in nicotine also depends on the route of administration, which again is something I'm used to thinking of in a drug context. Probably don't see it thought about so much in terms of tobacco harm reduction, so that's very interesting. But then I got onto the bit which really made me feel quite guilty because it was pure entertainment, which was the films. I do hope that people who didn't get to see them there do go out of their way to find them. Some of them are outstanding. I think they're a really useful tool. The ones from the NCSCT I will be sending to a lot of my colleagues who like to think they know about this stuff, but often reveal they don't, and they're short, sharp, and convey a lot. There was also some absolute stunning ones. I can see there have been criticisms, actually, of the suggestion that vaping can make you impervious to small arms fire and potentially offers the secret of immortality. But until you've watched The Vaping Not Dead, I might not be conveying it all, but there were some great films. There was also one that I think shows the folly of misguided, at best, public health approaches, The Stupid Sheep in Pasadena. I do recommend that. We don't normally go out to insult people when we're trying to reach them. And if we were doing it with drug users in the UK, we'd probably lynch people for doing that, so I'm not quite sure why. I was very interested in the session around trust and how we trust, and there was discussions around evidence. Harry's made the point, I think there is an awful lot of traction we can build on where harm reduction is accepted, or there's at least beachheads we can make use of. So the drugs field, but also in mental health and in sexual health. I mean, another take-home comment I'm unlikely to forget is that e-cigs are better than condoms. Now, clearly that's very contextual, but I think as a message to relay to some of my colleagues about efficacy, it's got a lot going for it. The panel session yesterday about channeling passion productively, I think that's really important. It's probably not worth expending too much energy on trying to convert people who aren't going to be converted. We need to concentrate on people who we might be able to convert. Session this morning I thought really was about the doability, about how this can be done, how we can actually do it at pace. Obviously the need for more research, and I think we need to keep doing that, but we shouldn't let the research hamper hamper our progress. So I think, you know, what did I get out of it really was, you know, there's more we can do around knowing the facts. There's more we can do about targeting our messages at particular audiences, be that people who are smoking, people who are interested in vaping, be that politicians, be that the policymakers. And there was some great stuff today that I think, well, from the days that we can pull together on that. And also, my final bit really is knowing the value of exchanging views and keeping in touch. As our colleague from South Africa who's just gone, another great anecdote, you know, about kissing your pastor or your grandmother not being very exciting. And so you need to sometimes be in a space where you're discussing and things which might be a bit uncomfortable, but that's where the value lies. And I think I will now hand over for the films.
All right. All right. So yeah, I get the honor and privilege here of doing some awards, and we were gonna do one big award here for Best Picture, but actually there was so many good things we thought we're gonna expand this a little bit. So I'm gonna get started with this because obviously this is the last session. Everybody needs to go take a nap and prepare for dinner. But let's do this. So one of the things that was so fun was to see so many of you guys that are in a lot of the films, and also so many of the directors that came today. One of the directors actually flew over here all the way from the UK. He's working on a new Disney project, lead animator for, I won't say which one, but it's a new Disney movie that's coming out. So it's a lot of great things. A lot of people came over here, a bunch of world premieres. We had a full house most of the time, standing room only at times. And yeah, it was great. It was very special. So one of the things we wanted to recognize here, like I said in the opening session, was that we want to create a new crop, a new generation of filmmakers that are thinking about this, bringing a new perspective to it. So we created a Best New Director Award to encourage future generations to think about this. And I'm proud to give the first award to Kai Tinsley for his film Clouds, based in the UK. Come on up here. Yeah. It was excellent. It was very good. We should get a picture together here. All right, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, that was good. One of the other awards we created here, kind of in some cases to look back at those who were looking forward, and we created an award called the Visionary Award for those folks who had kind of looked, you could see the future a long time ago, and were able to be passionate about it long before this was an issue everybody was talking about. And the award this year goes to director Gianluca Fratellini for his film Life and Smoke, which was made, I think, 13 years ago and was an excellent one. He is the director who was working on the Disney film as well as Rio. He was working on John Carter, like all kinds of movies. It was kind of crazy how, and we were very honored to have him here. So I don't know if he's in the room at this point. Gianluca, are you in here? All right, well, I will give him that later, but if you get a chance to see that, I know they'll be sharing some of these on the GFN website, and I'll be sharing some of these as well on the A Billion Lives page, so you can get a chance to check that out. All right. Another award we wanted to have here was to recognize kind of leadership and creativity and bringing these projects together. They're not very easy, and some of these things can be very complicated. So we created a Best Director Award for a director who had kind of essentially put the most craziness together into one film and made something that was very unique and special. And this year's award goes to Dominique Aubert for his film The Vaping Not Dead, which, yes, are you here, Dominique? So, anybody from that production here? I know a lot of people are falling asleep because they were partying last night celebrating the film festival, so we'll give him that award later. But if you get a chance to see that, it's not released yet. We had the world premiere here yesterday, but they're going to be releasing that online soon. So, all right, and the final award, which is kind of the bigger one, and we actually created a little bit of a trophy here for Best Picture. That award goes to our friends over at the National Center for Smoking Cessation and Training, which they did this one in association with the NNA and supported by the Public Health England. That's a lot of words to say. And for their film Passive Vaping, A Guide for Parrots. So we have that award for you. I believe, Luis, yeah, you're here. Wonderful. As well as you can take this. There you go. So one of the reasons why that award is important and why we felt those guys definitely deserve that is because we need organizations that have the credibility and the audience and the infrastructure to make and distribute and have credibility with these things is really vital, and we encourage organizations around the world that have that sort of ability to make an impact, to embrace kind of the science and to get it out there in a credible way, an intelligent way, in a very, and this particular thing was an animated film, a very interesting way, and I thought that was very effective. So that's the awards for this year, and I'm going to pass this mic on, but thank you guys so much for coming, and we may have something next year. We'll see.
Thank you very much. Let's start by analysing the issue we're dealing with, cigarette smoking. The epidemic of cigarette smoking is less than 100 years old, and as drug epidemics go, that's pretty short, and reference was made to that during this meeting. On the other hand, cigarette smoking involves very powerful market forces, which obviously is complicating the issue. We're dealing with an industry which is worth $800 billion a year, which involves selling a product to 1 billion smokers, about 20% of adults in the world. And it's a very profitable industry. All of that complicates what we're doing. And we talk a lot about the public health implications. 100 million deaths from cigarette smoking in the last 100 years, and an anticipated 1 billion deaths in the next 100 years. So this is a big, important issue by any stretch of the imagination. During the meeting, we heard a lot of questions, we heard a lot of details, some important questions, important details. For me, there is one standout first-order question, and that is, what are we going to do about it? Option A, the business as usual option, involves 2/3 of those smokers being killed by the product they're consuming. And we know that with a high degree of certainty. Option B, which is the rethink option, is more than 95% less risky. But we don't know that for certain. We won't know for maybe 20 years exactly how much less risky that is to 2 decimal places. So the question is, the first order question is, do we keep on going with option A, or do we make it easy for people to switch to option B? And I think that question is made a lot easier to answer by our knowledge of what's happened before in this area with other tobacco harm reduction products. There are other harm reduction options, and a lot of time was spent in this conference, quite rightly so in my view, on snus. We've known about snus for scores of years. It's well documented. The benefits are very clear and the adverse effects are very minor. And as has been said in this conference and previously many times, it's a real proof of concept of what we're arguing for. And our opponents who are critical of tobacco harm reduction don't have an answer for it. Some years ago, Willie Sutton became famous in the United States as a bank robber. Finally, he got caught. And when the police were interviewing him, and they said, "Willie, why do you keep on robbing banks?" And Willie Sutton said, "Because that's where the money is." And it's a good principle to follow where the money is. And where the money is in reducing tobacco-related harm is in Asia, where 60% of smokers live. and I was delighted to hear that the presentation from India, and also the focus in this year on other low-income groups in other countries and low-income groups in high-income countries. That's where the problem is. That's where Willie Sutton would be concentrating if he was in charge of this operation. The question all of us want to know is, how long will it take? I don't think you're going to like my answer, but my answer is it's going to take a long time to sort this out, and even in the decades to come, there'll still be some recalcitrant countries that will stick with option A, the business as usual option. We've got to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. We've got to prepare for a long haul. Our opponents are deeply entrenched, and we shouldn't forget that. Mention was made earlier today about, as the Americans call it, marijuana legalization. Gallup poll in 1969, 12% favoured legalization. The Gallup poll in the United States in 2017, 64% favoured legalization. It took almost half a century to increase the support for legalization to the level where almost 2/3 of Americans now support it. And it wasn't a linear development. It was, progress was very slow for a long time, and then it sped up. First there was a trickle of support, and now there's a flood of support. And I expect we'll have the same phenomenon here with tobacco harm reduction, that we're going to face entrenched opposition, a lot of resistance for some time to come, and then things will speed up towards the end, when we will finally see the fruits of our labours. It's been a great conference. Congratulations to Jerry and Patty and all the others who helped put this meeting together. Wonderful organisation. It's so refreshing to hear the consumers, the vapors, given such prominence in this and previous conferences. Thank you.
Hi. Just a quick apology in advance. I'm not a very confident public speaker. My skill set lies elsewhere, but we're going to give this a go. And Martin Colley, you're going to be busy after this. You're going to get a lot of people coming up to you because I'm a Scotsman, and you're going to be saying to you, what the hell has he just said? Anyway, so back to the conference. I have to be honest, when Paddy told me what the strapline for this conference was going to be, rethinking nicotine, I was really, really disappointed because I thought I knew everything there was to know about nicotine, and I've been proved utterly wrong. I've learned so much from this conference, and I'm grateful that they actually used that strapline. So it really should be crystal clear to everyone now, if it wasn't already that way beforehand, that nicotine is not the problem. It's a very, very big part of the solution. So we've rethought nicotine. So what's important now for me as a consumer is what you guys do when you leave here, as groups or as individuals. A lot of people are rightly looking to the UK as being a good place for harm reduction, particularly in this field. But again, being a Scotsman, we don't particularly like the UK. And we've got a little saying that says, we're doing well, but we're no doing great. So I'll translate that in English for you. We're doing very well, but we're not doing brilliantly. So I've just got a few messages here really for various sectors. Tobacco companies, you're very much still under the microscope from a consumer point of view. You're turning the heads and you're doing the right things. You're heading in the right direction. However, this is one of the latest devices. I won't say who it's made by. You're not getting it right. You're not talking to vapors. This thing spits, leaks, gurgles all over the place. You need to speak to more vapors. E-liquid industry. We've got a real problem here with branding, IP theft, stuff like that. And thanks to my good colleague John Summers. And basically, this is a layer of shit that we, as advocates, would rather not have to deal with, and it's totally unnecessary. So sort yourselves out. Public health. You need to do more. You need to look to the likes of Public Health England. You need to talk to Martin Dockrell. And we really do need more from you. You get it. And you're in a position of power that you can actually do something about it. Stop smoking services. Well, a little story. I went to some of my local stop smoking services, and I was appalled when I went in there. And I asked a simple question: what do you do when a guy comes in and asks about electronic cigarettes? And the response was, we can't help them, more or less. We can't help them. I said to them, well, maybe, what do you do? Throw them out the door? And they say, well, no, we try and steer them down different routes and so forth. I said, could you maybe send them to me? And I gave them a business card, the NNA card. And they said, no, we won't do that. We refuse to do that. So you're just not doing the job. You're letting people die. It's shocking. Tobacco control, junk scientists that you employ and deploy, and ultimately onto the media. We're sick of it. We're sick of the lies. We're sick of all the garbage that you spout out. Why don't you go and look to Farsalinos first? Get his opinion before this garbage gets into the press. Because again, you're killing people. You're putting people off. Please stop it. Next one, researchers. Professor Linda Bald, who is unfortunately not with us this year, she came to me a couple of years ago, and I was amazed at what she asked me to do. Could you help us with a study? And I said yes. They listened to us. They listened to the vapors. Not only that, her researchers came to me and said, teach me how to vape. I was shocked, utterly shocked at this. Not only did they want me to show them how to do it, they wanted to experience it. That is good research. We then took on, it was a really, really difficult study to do. We were going into elderly people's homes where we had one researcher, one vapor, experienced vapor. I put together a team of about a dozen vapors, and we split the job up between us. These people had an awful lot of underlying health problems, and a lot of them were elderly. And one that stuck out for me was one that we went through the process of taking them through the different nicotine levels and the different flavours to try and find one that suited them. And we were always asked by the researcher, how do we think these guys are going to get on? So I was going through the levels of nicotine, and you could see the face lighting up every now and again as we went up through the nicotine levels. We got to 18 milligrams, which is the limit in the EU at the moment. It's not 20 milligrams, by the way, it's 18. Don't fall into that trap, because they won't make 20 milligram nicotine for fear of being done by trading standards and so forth. Anyway, we got to 18 milligrams, and he was just about getting there. And he says, yeah, that's great. And I thought, you're not going to make it with that. And knowing that I had in my pocket this little bottle here, which is 24 milligrams, would have tipped him over the edge. And sure enough, I gave him about a 65% chance of getting through the course. He didn't make it. He relapsed back to smoking. It's shocking that I couldn't pull that. It was heartbreaking. It was soul-destroying that I had this in my pocket and I could not give it to him. That's wrong. I'm sorry to say it. That is so wrong. That needs to be sorted. And where are we now? Consumers and advocates, stop the infighting, please. Your device is no better than anyone else's device. Heat not burns there, it's there to stay. Focus on the big picture. You're losing direction here. Please stop the infighting. And, get on with the job in hand. Well, I think that's my 5 minutes up, just about. I was going to have a go at Pharma, but that can wait for another day. Thanks very much for listening.
Hi. Well, I can't use this one. Damn it. I wanted to use that one. Okay. I'm Cynthia Cabrera. First of all, I want to thank Jerry and the organizers. This conference is wonderful. I am privileged and honored to be here again. It's just terrific. In general, when I look back at the last year, last conference to this conference, we still have a lot of challenges ahead of us. There are some pockets of sanity and reason, but generally, it's still an uphill fight. We still have a lot of things to do. And it reminds me of something that Joe Gitchell said yesterday. He brought up the movie Highlander, and he brought it up as an example of a cinematic masterpiece he was willing to review to see if it was still a cinematic masterpiece. And this resonated with me because when I was a kid, I used to watch Highlander, the TV series. So yesterday, I brought up to several people how awesome it was that Joe brought up Highlander, and the response was, "What's Highlander?" So nobody knew what it was. So quickly, Highlander is about an immortal who ends up fighting with a bunch of other immortals. He doesn't really want to, he's a good guy, but at the end, He has to kill everybody because there can only be one. And it reminds me of the struggle that we have. So often it seems like there can only be one solution or one way to do it or one way of thinking about it. And that is a big problem for us. Really what we need to do, we need to focus on the similarities rather than on the differences. When I think about the past year, when I think about this conference, a recurrent theme has been confusion. Consumer confusion, industry confusion, confusion about what to do about the confusion. It's a problem. I wish I had actually cued that song Land of Confusion because it would have been totally awesome, but I didn't do it. But that's something that needs to be sorted out. There's so much of it, and I'm encapsulating, but it really is a large subject. We desperately need context. We need to hold people to account, make sure that things are put into perspective, that there is always context. Whether we're talking about relative risk versus absolute risk, or the little gem that I read this morning, it was an article about Juul, and an executive from Juul had been interviewed, and there was a comment in there from Matt Myers at the Center for Tobacco Products, and he was highlighting the the ravages of this epidemic by talking about a young man, and he said, young people like Julian, who started juuling in his late teens, and he can't quit. Context, man. He makes it sound like Julian has been juuling for decades, like he's, selling his body to get some pods. I bet you Julian is still in his late teens. Like, we have got to hold people to account. We have got to have reason and sanity when we talk about these things. Well, I'll get to the we in a minute. We need consensus. This has been a recurring theme the past couple of days, and we need consensus among us. We need to establish a common language. I was so heartened to hear the discussion earlier today about what is addiction. Let's cover what is dual use, what are the approaches we can agree on, what is harm reduction. I have to say that every time I hear a harm reduction advocate say something like, yes, we have to support alternative products. Of course, what we want is everyone to get off of any tobacco type product forever. I'm like, no, you're an abstinence person masquerading as a harm reduction person, and that's not helpful. And we need to call those people out too. That is an issue. And then we also have to decide, who is the we? Who is the we that is going to do this, right, in this consensus? So finally, what we need, or what I perceive, is that things have to change. They have been changing, but they need to continue changing. Many years ago, I had a college advisor who said to me, and it was advice that she gave me, which at the time I did not find particularly helpful, but now I feel like it's relevant. She said to me, to the question of your life, the answer is you. To the question of your problem, the answer is you. And that's what I feel about us, right? We are the we. We have to continue with the change. We need to move forward. We need to not lose heart. We are the answer. We need to be louder, better, faster, and we need to keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Jerry, unless you have anything else to say, that's it. Thank you for another very, very successful conference. I hope you all have great trips home. Remember, next year, return, bring a friend, bring an opponent, bring a legislator, and let's change the world. Thank you.